Thanks, Will, and thanks, Roger and Rob, for really two excellent presentations. I think in this field we don't have a lot of data on who we are and what we do, and I think you've really given us quite a bit, so thank you for that. I'm going to take a little different tact and step back a bit. In a recent New Yorker article, there was a piece on the Vatican Library, which I know well, and pointed out that it holds between 70 or 80,000 manuscript volumes, and these represent the substantial portion of the infrastructure of scholarship from the 9th through the 15th century. Advanced learning was based on knowing and copying these texts over generations, and still today, in order to engage a lot of topics for those the early period, a visit to the Vatican or comparable libraries like the British Library is essential. We all know, of course, that in the 15th century, with the invention of movable type, this manuscript world was transformed. Texts were increasingly printed and rarely copied, and print has proved to be an enormous significance for learning, and though not without its complications, which are a matter for many historians to still probe. But certainly by the 16th century, print formed the basis of the basic framework for scholarly discourse, and Bill Rosenberg and I, in the book that has just come out, talk about that as passing a threshold of adequacy, where by the 16th century, for most people doing important work, print really provided an adequate basis of authoritative information. Well, in the process, as Elizabeth Eisenstein has shown, print shaped discourse and learning as much as scholarship was shaped by printed sources. Well, now comes digital technology, and as both speakers suggest today, we are now in the process, I would argue, of passing through another threshold of adequacy, a new one. I would say not necessarily populated by conservatives or progressive-minded people, but rather by people who, in varying degrees, find these new technologies of varying levels of service and so forth. And what I think is interesting, and I think the real point of these two papers, while we can quibble about the different categories and so forth, is that there is an undeniable trend that we are moving toward a new world that is going to be increasingly digital, and that print may well fade into a kind of vestige of the latter part of the last millennium. So digital technologies are slowly and gradually releasing all of us from the boundaries of print culture. So, and also Eisenstein's work, which is, I find extremely useful in this context, notes that print was not only a definer of culture, but it was also an agent of change. And I think that same transformative agency we are now experiencing with this variety of new digital products that we are still trying to sort out. So both these papers, I think, really fundamentally are really encouraging if we think that digital technology opens new possibilities for historians. Roger reports that perceptions of the library are, as a core institution of print culture, is now being transformed and changed. He reports it as diminishing as a physical structure and becoming more important as sort of an organizational mechanism for material. And he reports that the use of digital materials are on the rise, and I think that's actually to be expected. Even that I was surprised by this, half of faculty, did you say half faculty are considering publishing in digital media? I think for historians that's quite remarkable. So I think these are clearly signs of a steady, slow, quiet transformation. And I would argue that it is now an inevitable movement across a threshold of adequacy where the economics, the convenience, the power, and the possibilities of digital media will transform discourse, leaving print, as I said earlier, a valuable but increasingly esoteric vestige of the past 500 years. Now, as both speakers point out, there are problems. There are trying to convince people to see the possibilities is a problem. People are very much comfortable in existing ways of doing things. Robert, I think, pointed out quite nicely that we all have challenges in learning these new programs. They pop up and they're replaced, and you've got to learn them, and you don't use them, and you forget. And I mean, there's a whole dynamic now in this kind of messy period of transformation into a new kind of technological world that's frustrating. And not unlike, as I was saying to Roger earlier, the frustration of the people dealing with print trying to figure out what the real text of the Bible was. You know, it took them decades, if not centuries, to figure that out. So there are these inevitable problems. Problems of, as Roger points out, the trying to find the right mix of technology to reach the people you want to reach with what you're doing. Rob points out that there are problems in the prestige. People not, I mean, it has nothing to do with the effectiveness of the media and getting the word out, but it just doesn't feel right. And something nice about having that book. And the cult, there's a cult of print that's hard to diminish. But at the same time, there are great new things. There are new meanings. Roger really leads us to see that there's just new ways of even understanding what library assistance means, what the role of the librarian is, and how that works. What the notion, as Will was saying, what the notion of a publication is, what the notion of authoritative information is. I mean, all this still has to be worked out. And at the same time, too, there's loss. I mean, I think there's a danger of getting caught up with the excitement of the possibilities and the embracing of the new without realizing that there is some loss in the structure and the discipline that print gave to information during this great period that we have lived through. So I think one needs to be mindful that in embracing the new, we are giving up some value in the old. But I think both papers really point to the reality of an inevitability of a new age of scholarship shaped by and dependent on information technology, new information technology. Now, I would also add that I think the papers could have gone further. I think there was, in both cases your data is a little bit old, but I think the impact of Google Books is huge, as Will was saying. Now holding some 4 million books, but hanging on to 10 million books. I mean, once the copyright issues are resolved and this material is more widely available, which inevitably will happen, I think the whole process by which we encounter sources is going to be just blown away. With the one actually, and you're intriguing, the idea that this all might be stored in the cloud has some interesting implications, but that's a matter for another time. The papers both point to the dynamic change in the infrastructure that supports scholarship, but I think pays less attention to how scholarship itself is changing. I think the focus was more on the infrastructure in the world around scholarship rather than scholarship itself. Rob mentioned, sort of suggests this when he talks about pushing the boundaries of scholarship, moving into new areas, but I'm not sure what this means. I think we need to spend some time with our historian colleagues to see what dynamics are going on within various subfields where digital technology would be useful and where some of the points of resistance might be more clearly identified. A third thing, if you're keeping count, is while the infrastructure is changing, so too I think our perceptions of the past changing. history's changing. And so we need to ask how this new technology will help us connect with new voices, new documentation, artifacts, tell complete stories, to deal with multiple or parallel paths, to uncover new realities, to insert sophisticated argument into the multimedia environment. I think sometimes there's a lot of emphasis on bells and whistles without really understanding how these new media can beef up an argument. Another thing is, what about the footnote? I mean, the whole grammar of objectivity now may change. We no longer need to link just to the citation, but we can link actually to the document itself. And from that point of view, last year at the Bentley Library, our users scanned 60,000 documents. So people are building their own archives to link to their own work. So the infrastructure of this kind of exposition, I think, is being developed. What about the role of our academic communities in shaping our understanding of the sources? We're talking a lot about how scholars, you both talked about how scholars interact with sources differently, but Bill Rosenberg and I really ask in our book, what responsibilities do the scholarly communities have in communicating an understanding of sources that work for them using digital technologies? And I think that again puts some of the burden on this, not only on libraries, archives, and external elements, but also on academic communities themselves. Another thing is, what about I think both papers really beg this question, what about the training of graduate students? I mean, how are we going to get, training of graduate students, in my view, is abysmal to begin with. There are many aspects of this that could be improved, but certainly particularly if we have people, your comment that maybe we're attracting people who are technology averse, how can we kind of move them comfortably into more seeing the possibilities, and it's a service to them. I mean, how can you take a 24-year-old, 25-year-old graduate student and not prepare them for the digital age? I think it's a disservice, because I do believe it's inevitable. And then finally, what about, this may get me into trouble, but I was glad Will kind of raised it so I don't feel quite so outside. What about scholarly productivity? Here we are investing millions of dollars in all sorts of systems and digital sources and surrogates and so forth. Are productivity expectations going to change? I mean, should they change? I mean, can we tolerate people who are just for personal reasons not embracing new forms of efficiency? As Will was saying, going to the library, checking footnotes, all that kind of stuff is now so different than it was 10 years ago. So, will the level of tolerance and maintaining the old ways of doing things when so much is being invested in the new be tolerated? And I think that's, all this kind of derives from your numbers. They're kind of there, they're moving, pushing us in these directions, and I think these questions are definitely going to arise. So I think both papers, just to conclude, really effectively show that we are in the midst of an enormous transformation, and it's coming, and you just see it. It's just heading up that way. It's so clear in both papers. So, and it's shifting fundamentals, it's shifting boundaries, it's shifting conceptions, and I think the only real question is, what will next year bring? So, thanks.
Well, first off, a big thank you to all of our panelists for coming today and presenting some very interesting questions, I think. So.